Good night, class. If I do the, guys, cut that, please. I don't want to say good night twice in a row. They left it in last week. Good evening, class. Both those sitting in front of me, some of whom had to kind of come through blizzardy conditions to get here, and all of those of you who are watching at home tonight, thank you for joining us. We'd like to just let you know that if you are watching, we would like for you to call 330-453-2519 and let me know you're watching. Also, if you are class members who are watching from home, the only way that I can give you attendance credit is if you call. Otherwise, I don't know that you're one of those viewers. So if you would call in, please call. Let me know that you are watching. Also, if you have a prayer request, please call in. And when I get those prayer requests, we do pray for them. I know we have, I've got a prayer request today for several ladies. We are praying for them, that God will undertake for them. And also, if you are still interested in getting the Strong's Concordance, it's a wonderful tool. It will help you utilize the notes that you're either downloading or picking up or asking us to mail to you. And that is because it has the Hebrew and Greek dictionary in the back. We're still going to give them, we're going to extend it through the month of February, $20. If you want us to mail it to you, it is $3 shipping and handling. Otherwise, you can come in, pick it up at the church, and get this concordance for $20. We've made that available for the rest of the month, as long as they last. That is a $5 savings, and so we just want to put tools in your hand that will help you in your Bible study. Also, if you want to give, if you're sitting in class, we have the Joash chest to my right, your left, and you can give your offering there for Wednesday night, or if you're watching at home, you can text to give, you can give on our website, or you can do it the old-fashioned way, which is send it by snail mail. And lately it has been snail mail. I had a birthday the end of December, and yesterday I actually got a birthday card that was mailed on December 24th. So, but if that's the only way you can send in your offering, that's fine. So, yeah, surprise. It's like, oh, is this for my next birthday or my last birthday?
What's the number on it? I'm just kidding.
When I looked at the postmark, it was December 24th. I thought, my goodness. But that makes life interesting. If you do not have notes and you need them tonight, just wave at us and we'll make sure you get them. I think everybody has them. We are on note number 10, I believe, yes, if my notes are correct. So we are looking at the 15th verse of the 4th chapter of the book of Romans. Verse 15. Because the law brings about wrath, for where there is no law, there is no transgression. So the law brings about wrath because of man's disobedience to the law. Because once you have a law, and I think probably the best example of that is there are certain highways in different parts of the world, and basically it is they don't have any speed limit. You just go how fast you want to go, and they don't pick you up. They kind of feel if you're not intelligent enough to drive at a speed that you can handle. And by the way, people who go on those highways, they feel, there's one in Germany, they feel that if you do that, that it's on your own head. They expect you to drive fast if you can handle it, but not to go beyond where you'd be controlled. But the minute that you are on a highway or a roadway that has a speed limit sign, guess what? Then it's not your decision anymore. There's a standard. So you're not transgressing if you're going 80 miles an hour on a roadway that has no speed limit. But if you go 80 miles on a highway that has a posted 65 miles per hour, you've done what if you've gone 80? You've broken a law. So the reason why the law brings about wrath is because of man's disobedience to the law. Because once there is the law, once God established the law, once he gave the law, then you had a knowledge of what is within the law and what is outside the law. So therefore, the law condemns those who fail to keep its commandments perfectly and continuously. Say, well, I obeyed that last week. Well, I know, but it's a continuous commandment. So you have to do perfectly and continuously. Since no one can do that, no one has ever obeyed the law completely. And I'm not just talking about the 10 Commandments, but there were 613 additional commandments on top of that. Plus there were certain things that you could or could not do, or there were certain ways you had to do something. And since no one can do that, all who are under the law are condemned to death. Because the soul that sins shall what? Die. Shall die. And Romans chapter 1 already let us know. They said, well, thank goodness I'm not under the law. I was never under the law. I was never born under the law. But understand something, there was the law, and then there was what? The law that God gave, the law of Moses. But there was also what? The law of your conscience. So that every man is condemned. Now C.S. Lewis, who was probably one of the greatest apologists for Christianity, I think I've read everything. At some point in my life, I have written everything that he wrote. If you have not read anything by C.S. Lewis, you owe it to yourself. I would suggest the very first thing you read by Lewis is Mere Christianity. It's an excellent book. And then the books that are an easy read and yet have some heavy, heavy spiritual truth in them are the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yes.
Originally written for children, and they're very good, except when you get to the last book, The Last Battle, a little heavy. Very true. Jesus died for the sin of the whole world, but that doesn't mean that every human being is going to be reconciled. And basically that last book in the Chronicles of Narnia make that very clear. The problem with pain, surprised by joy, there are just so many of them. But he was very interesting about C.S. Lewis. He literally had got on a train at one point, and he said by the time, and as he's riding on this train, he's basically, the Lord's dealing with him. The Spirit of God is dealing with him. And he said, I got on the train a questioning agnostic, and I got off the train a committed Christian. And it's just we really were very fortunate to have C.S. Lewis. This is just a sidebar that you probably don't even need to know, but C.S. Lewis died on the same day as President Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. But he said that the whole world consists of just two kinds of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done. and those to whom God is saying, thy will be done. And I don't have to tell you which is better. You know, it gets to the point, and I think that has something to say with what we're going through right now as a culture. You know, we like sheep, have gone astray. We've got our own way. That's why Jesus had to take upon himself our iniquity. And it gets to a point where if you push back so hard on God, and I think that's one of the saddest times is when an individual or a people, and God will just back off for a time and say, okay, your will be done. We even have a kind of a vernacular expression, don't we, when people do their own thing? And I think it was around a long, long time before Sarah Palin. But remember, she'd say, how'd that work out for you? And I think sometimes God is looking at us and saying, how's that working out for you now? You've pushed me almost totally out of society. How's that working out for you? But your will be done. It's exactly what happened with Israel, is it not? When they said, we want a king, we want to be like all the other nations. I mean, they should have taken a good look at the other nations before they said that. But they clamored and they clamored and they clamored and they clamored, and they got a king. But he taxed them. And he was looking out for himself eventually. And by the time you get to Rehoboam, they said, oh, if you'll just relieve the tax burden that your father laid on the people, because he had to support 300 wives, 700 wives and 300 concubines. Can you imagine the shopping bill? And somebody has to pay for it, right? And he taxed the people, and he had all these stables and all these horses, and horses don't eat just a little bit, they eat a lot. And they said, if you will just ease up a little bit on the people, they will just serve you forever. And Rehoboam's response, now this is because it stemmed all the way back when the children of Israel, God wanted to be their king. And they said, no, we want to be like all the other people. Believe me, that's when we've gotten into trouble, when we wanted to be like all the other people. And that's one of our problems today. We want to be like all the other countries of the world. And he said, oh, they think my father taxed them? That was his response. In English, that's what his response was. They think my father taxed them. Wait till I get done with them. And that led to the splitting of the kingdom. So, understand something. When God removes the restraints, man falls apart. And I would say when man keeps saying, I'm going to cast off the restraint. And I hear so much of this in the world today. Well, being religious, and there's where they miss it anyway, but they'll say, being religion just puts restraints on people. We just don't want to be constrained. And some of you are in Sunday morning class. And maybe this Sunday we will get to the thing that in this nation, that stands in this nation, that represents personal, unrestrained freedom. And that's why here we are in 2021, and we're about as unrestrained as a people we can be. there has to be restraint. But there is liberty, but that liberty has to come within the umbrella of the constraints that God gives us in His Word. So this talked about transgression, because verse 15 talked about the transgression. Because the law brings about wrath, for where there is no law, there's no transgression. So what is transgression? For you Greek students, parabasis. I've given you the Strong's number so you can look it up and look at it in greater detail. But this Greek word means the violation of a known law. See, if you don't know the law, you don't know if you're transgressing it, right? You did not come out of your mother's womb knowing what was right and what was wrong. So an act can be inherently wrong even if there is no law against it. I don't know, and I've read the Constitution many times, I have not seen a law in there that says you can't be nasty to somebody. No, you can't be nasty to somebody. But if you are, something happens, right? If you're really nasty, there's at least a twinge, right? Or whether there's any law, even as a child, you know, you might have been looking out for yourself and maybe you bit somebody. I know my cousin bit me and all I did was took her end of the jump rope. And she knew it was wrong, because after she did it and I'm starting to cry, she runs down the street, not too far from here. And I did, she with me. Okay, she knew. Why? Because if she didn't know. Now there's no law. There is no law. These are childhood laws. Thou shalt not bite your cousin. There's no law there. But there's an inherent law. And I know this is kind of belaboring something very simple, but there are people that say, well, I don't know why I should do that, or I don't even know why I should even acknowledge a God. Well, there is an inherent law that has been placed in each one of us, that there is a knowledge of God. And that's why we looked at the written law, we looked at conscience. So an act can be inherently wrong even if there isn't a law against it. Now the Jews thought that they inherited blessing through having the law. We're blessed because we have the law. And we know they didn't keep the law, and they're not keeping the law today. They have become very creative at not keeping the law. But they said that's why we're blessed. We have the law, the law, the law, the law. We have the Ten Commandments, and we have all these other laws, and God gave us the law, and we are so blessed by it. But all they inherited was transgression. Because now, because they had the law, now they know transgression. Now God gave the law so that sin might be seen as transgression. See, if you don't know anything is wrong, like I said, if you're driving down a road that doesn't have any speed limit, you may not even recognize that, it's a little bit wrong going 85 miles an hour. Might not be too good. It might endanger yourself or someone else. But it's not transgression because there's nobody there to pull you over. But it is still. So what happens? Now you have something that says, no, you can't do that. So the law was given to show sin in its true light and overstepping of what is right. Without the law, they didn't know that. Were there pagan nations in whom God's people would come in and reside in that area, and they didn't know what was right or wrong? And that's another thing I believe about our culture. There are people who are unlawful, immoral, okay, immoral. But they know they're immoral. In other words, they're doing the things by choice, and they know they are, and they just chosen to do that. I can probably, my generation, for the most part, was probably one of the last generations that had a knowledge of truly what was right and wrong. And that's not just my opinion. I remember sitting with Brother Lee Dunlap, who was the principal of our school. And we were talking about this, and he said that. He said, I think your generation was the last in two things. The last generation who had a solid concept of what is right and wrong. Didn't always do it, but we had a solid concept. And secondly, you were the last generation that saw a cause greater than yourself. In other words, you were willing to do something just to do it to help somebody without first calculating what's in it for me. Why do I say that? Because we are seeing a generation that is far worse than being immoral. They are amoral. There is no concept of morality whatsoever. I mean, they'll just do anything. And we've seen some examples of that in the last month. But we've seen it before. So, the law was given then to show sin in its true light and overstepping of what is right into the realm of what is wrong. So the law was given to put the stamp of positive transgression, and here's the key, upon already existing sin. And you can see that if you go from the fall and then you move to that time prior to basically the giving of the law, were there things that were obviously wrong, but there was no law? And so there was no understanding other than kind of that inherent thing. For example, there was no law, and so Moses is there. He sees the Egyptian beating one of the Israelites, and he does what? He kills him, murders him. Now, we know he knew that it was inherently wrong, because what did he do? He buried him. Thought nobody saw. But what you see is the law had not been given. The law had not been given yet. Sometimes we have to, as we look at things, look at them within that context. There was an inherent law of conscience that was operative, but the law as such, but the law made it what? Clear. Then there was no doubt, okay, this is, you do this, you don't do this. You do this, you don't do this. For example, we've looked at Abraham. Abraham tithed. Tithed to Melchizedek. There was no law at that time, right? There was no law that said, okay, now in these additional laws beyond the 10 Commandments, this is what you do. And this is how you do, and how you do it. Is it possible to do the right thing in a wrong attitude? Absolutely. So the law even dealt with that. So you'd know whether it was in the right attitude or not. It was not to give the knowledge of sin as sin, because actually that was kind of there, right, even before, but to show that it was a violation of God's commandments. Because you knew this was kind of bad. When Cain killed Abel, did he know it was wrong? He knew it kind of was wrong. He didn't, because otherwise he wouldn't have answered the way he did when God says, "Hey, where's your brother?" How should I know I'm not my brother's keeper? And again, what did he do with his brother? This is way before the law. Buried him. No, I'll just get rid of the evidence here, and nobody will ever know what happened to my brother. And remember what God said to him? He said, "Your brother's blood cries out." So we're looking at Paul, who's writing to the church at Rome, and he's saying, "You've gotten some things wrong." And he was writing to correct and with truth some of the things they were getting wrong. And by the way, most of Paul's letters, with some exceptions, very few exceptions, are corrective letters. The letters to 1st and 2nd Corinthians are corrective letters to correct some problems. And believe me, Corinth had a great many problems that needed corrected. Galatians, and I don't even have to tell you something about the churches of Galatia. They had many problems. Galatians was written to correct problems. And then we get the benefit of those. Now, let's look at any questions on verse 15 or comments? Okay, let's look at verse 16. Therefore, it is of faith that it might be according to grace, and that is so important, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. So this promised inheritance is by faith, so that it may be in accordance with grace. So then the question becomes, how is faith related to grace? Faith is related to grace in the same way works is related to law. They're principles. Grace and law are the principles. And faith and works are the means by which we pursue those principles for our relationship with God. You are either going to have works, or you are going to do it by grace through faith. If you're going to try to do it by the works of the law, it's not going to be by grace. If you do it by faith, putting your trust, then obviously grace follows. We are saved by God's grace. We didn't earn it. You can't earn salvation. There's no way we could earn our salvation. There's no way we can work our way to salvation. Grace is appropriated by faith. How do I get God's grace? I know I can't be saved any way than through God's grace. I'll never earn my salvation. So, grace is appropriated by faith. I put my trust in what Jesus has done, and then I receive by grace. That's all he asks. He doesn't ask me to earn it. Salvation is of faith and nothing else. Sola fide. Only faith. That was what the very early church saw and realized. And it was in less than 100 years, you began to see a change. And things started getting added on to the church. This is necessary, and this is necessary, and this is necessary, and this is necessary, until by the time you get into the 1500s and Martin Luther, so many things have been added as necessary to work your way to salvation. And God gave that revelation to Martin Luther. It is only by faith. Now, grace cannot be obtained through works. Because why can't you obtain grace through works? Because the minute you work, it's no longer grace. If you say to someone, I'm going to do this for you, no strings attached. And then you start saying, well, I want to do this and this and this and this and this. Well, what does that do to the grace? It's out the door, because then it's, well, then you earned it. But grace cannot be obtained through works, because by definition, grace is given without regard to anything in the one who receives it. So when God looks at people to choose them, he doesn't call them out. He doesn't choose them by saying, well, you earned it, and you did more works, and you didn't do any works at all. No, it's by grace. So if God's promise had not been based on faith, but on works, it would not have been in accord with grace. Here's why that is important. The Jewish people were saying what? Abraham is our father. We come from Abraham, and we have inherited the promise God gave to Abraham. And now we have the law, and we just do, and we have all the mitzvot that we do, and we are earning all of this, and we've got our little bag of mitzvot, and that's what we're going to take to God and say, this is why we have everything we have. No. And they were saying, well, we got the law, and we came from Abraham, and then God gave the Mosaic law, and we have the law, and this is why we have everything we have. No, because Abraham trusted God, and it was through faith that he received the promise that God gave him. If Abraham would have stayed in Ur of the Chaldees, never moved, never did what God told him to do, trusting that what God told him was true, there would have been nothing. There would have been nothing. They could have had somebody give him some law, but it would not have done anything. It was based in faith. So it would not have been in accord with grace, and we know that that's how we receive anything from God, by grace through faith. The reason that faith, trust, is essential is that it is the only condition of the heart that accords with grace. It's the only one. All you have to do is do what? Trust me. That's all God wanted in the garden. Here's Adam and Eve. All he wanted them to do is what? Trust him. They had all their needs met. Every need met. All they had to do was trust him. And all they had to do was trust him, that if he told them, don't touch this no-no tree, that everything would be fine. And it took them a little while to finally keep looking at that no-no tree and wondering about that no-no tree and listening. And we have one narrative, but we don't know how long it took for Satan to wear down Eve. We have a pretty good idea because we did some calculations on why certain things happened, such as why did Jesus have to die at 33 and a half years of age? But we know one thing. All God wanted was their trust. Now the law God's grace is the deepest foundation of our guarantee. I forgot to give you that. Guarantee. Mm-hmm. The law condemns, right? Because what does the law do? The law gets in your face and says, this is sin, and you look at it, it's like a mirror, and say, oh, I see what I am. But it can't do anything to move you out of that condition. It just shows you the condition. Grace enables, because when I do that, then I say, oh, wretched person that I am. I know I am a wretched person. And then that's when God's grace is also seen. So grace enables. So that is hina in the Greek, Strong's 2443, and it introduces what is called grammatically in Greek a purpose clause. So we look at that and says, so that sometimes it's therefore, but it introduces the purpose. It prompts the question, what is the purpose? What is the purpose? And I think it's in New King James, it's therefore. In Old King James, it would be so that. It's the same Greek word. So the promise, epangelion, Strong's 1860. This is a legal term denoting summons or a promise to do or give something. Okay, and here's the promise. I will give you this, or I will do this for you. It is used in the Bible only of the promises of God, except in one instance. And all the other times you will hear promise used, according to this promise, I promise, as I promised. There's only one exception, and it is in Acts 23:21. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. That's speaking about a human promise. That is the only instance in the Bible where the promise is not, because there's a definite article there, is related to God and his promises. And this refers to a thing promised, this epangelion, a gift graciously given. And here's the key, is not a pledge secured by negotiation. You know, man, and when I say man, I mean mankind, we are great negotiators, right? Some people think they're wonderful negotiators. But we are. Because we say what? If you do this, I'll do this. If you do this, I'll do this. But when God gives a promise, it's different. And there are two Greek words for promise. Hyposkisis, which is a promise which is entered into upon conditions. That's a promise, right? You go to buy a house, and they'll say, well, if we will keep this house for you if you will do what? If you will put earnest money down, right? Deposit earnest money. And then we'll keep it for you. That's a condition. But epigelia, from which evangelion comes, is a promise made out of the goodness of one's heart unconditionally. Unconditionally. If salvation were to be based on our good deeds, all we do is trust Him. We don't work. We don't do anything. We just trust. But if salvation were to be based on our good deeds, and do you understand that is something that is unique to Christianity? Almost every other world religion has conditions. And this is the case, and this is true. If you will ask a Muslim if they're going to paradise, they'll say, only Allah knows. In other words, it just depends on if I've done enough. Even if you will speak to many Jewish people, it's, well, if I've done enough, it's vote. So this is unique to Christianity. If salvation were to be based on our good deeds, works of the law, we would always be plagued with doubts, right? As to whether we had done enough to merit God's favor. And there are people, I have met friends that feel that way. And I have shared before, talking with my mom's aunt, and we never ever knew before that particular time that she saw it like that. And that's what she said. She said, well, I'm just really praying that when I go, that my good deeds will outweigh my bad deeds and I'll get in. And I shared this before, and my mom looked at her. She said, that's not how it works. Sharon, tell her. And I looked at my mom. I thought, you've been in ministry longer than me. Why don't you tell her? But we had that conversation with her and say, oh, no. You could never have enough good deeds to earn your salvation. It's a free gift for your trust in the finished work of Christ. And so I went through with my mother's help. We went through that with her. I said, you don't have to worry and wonder. You can know today that Christ's finished work was enough. So, we don't have any doubt. Let me kind of rush through and get at least down to 17. Verse 17. Sure is Babayan. And this word means stable, because it said it's sure. That promise is going to be sure. And you can see, if you have a Bible like mine, off to the side, it has 949. So that the promise might be sure to all the seed. That it's going to continue, because that was God's unconditional promise. The promise that God gave Abraham was unconditional. And so all the people that want to lay all those conditions, no. They got the land, they'll still have the land, they will have the land during the millennium, they will have the land in the eternal state, they will always have the land, because God said, I have given you this land to you and your seed forever. Doesn't matter how many people vote differently. They don't really have a vote in this decision. But it means valid. It means something realized. Isn't it great when you've been promised something and it's realized? It's one thing to have the promise. It is the opposite of made of none effect that we saw in verse 14. Don't make this of none effect. Now, that should be Greek instead of Greek. I don't know what Greek is. That's a typo. I apologize. The Greek text places sure before promise. This word means stable, valid, something realized. And the Greek text places sure before promise. And Greek students, why? It has to do with, when Greek word order has to do with emphasis. The most important words will be found first in the Greek construction. So the Greek text places sure before promise to add emphasis to the assurance that this promise can be relied upon. In note 19, of the law refers to Jews who have embraced and faithed in Yeshua the Messiah. By the way, not all Jews. And that's why I gave you those two references in Revelation to take a look at it. Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, if you didn't jot them down before, you need to jot them down now and take a look at it. Revelation 2:9 and 3:9. The faith of Abraham is reproduced in all the righteousified. That's those who are dikaio, whether Gentile or Jew. Because Abraham, and as we move on into chapter 5, Abraham is the father of all those who put their trust in God, whether Jew or Gentile, because it's by faith in both cases. So the faith of Abraham then is reproduced in all the righteousified, whether Gentile or Jew. So note 20 says the trouble with the law is that it can diagnose the virus, sin, but it cannot bring about a cure. And if we've lived with anything in the last year, we know that's true. Yep. You can go get a test, and it can diagnose you have the virus. You test positive for the virus, but it can't do anything to cure. The test does not cure the virus. There are treatments, and Israel, I was just sharing with some people earlier, Israel has now come up with an inhaler to treat COVID, and it has been very successful, particularly successful for people who can then stay at home without having to be hospitalized, which takes the load off some of the hospitals. So, and it's Israel, so there's a promise there that's still continuing, right? All through you, all nations shall be blessed. And it continues, but it can't. It can tell you, just like a mirror can tell you you've got smudge on your cheek. It can't. The mirror can't remove it, but the mirror tells you it's there. So the law shows a person where he or she goes wrong. This is wrong, but does not help him or her from going wrong. Faith guarantees the promise. Put your trust in Christ. Put your trust in His completed, and by the way, it's finished work. There are many favorite verses that I have in the Bible, but I think one of my favorite Greek words is tetelestai. It is finished. It is completed. There's nothing that needs to be added to the atoning work of Christ. It is a done deal. So next week we will pick up at 17. So I brought the tests tonight, but we're not ready for them. But we'll get there. Questions or comments? Okay. Don't forget, if you are watching, if you want one of the concordances sent to you, we're extending the $20 price plus $3 shipping and handling. You can order those, you can either send it in, you can call us. However you want to do that, we will get that out to you. Don't forget, I need to know, if you're watching and you're enrolled in the class, I need for you to call and let me know. That's the only way I know to give you attendance credit. Also, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, and I know we've got people now watching in Israel, people who are watching in the Philippines, people who are watching across the country, please call in, let me know you're watching. We want to pray for you. We love you. And you who didn't make it in because of the weather, hope to see you next Wednesday night. Don't forget, if you're in class, the Joash chest is to my right. If you are interested in going on our Israel trip in October of 2021, which is in October of this year, we are opening up the trip. Just have a few slots available, but we'd love to have you travel with us. So if you're interested, please call, let me know you're interested, and as soon as we have the new brochures, I will be glad to mail one out to you. Have a blessed, blessed evening, have blessed sleep, and know that we are sending our love to you tonight.